So hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are diving into the decayed and diseased world of Nurgle. I'll be showing you how to paint this Nurgle ruins base step by step, and we will working with enamel colors to really bring out the grime, creating a toxic sludge effect using a 2-component resin, and we will finishing things off with some tufts for that overgrown abandoned look. So let's get started. So at the beginning I started to spray paint the overall model black and followed up with the Vallejo surface primer with my airbrush and tried to color all the recesses and parts that I have missed. And I used, I think, an AK spray primer, whatever was available. Personally, for terrain pieces I do not care so much, as these are just things I want to get to a certain standard. I have a good looking terrain piece, but I do not care so much about all details and everything. But this is the great part for our hobby. You can always extend it to a level you feel satisfied, and that's what I really enjoy. So this will be quite a long video, I have to admit. I think it's 1 hour in total. At the end, pretty much half of it, I jumped to the acrylic resin part. Please do so if you want to skip the painting part. For the grays, I used more warm colored gray because I thought this was fitting better to the still quite warm, vibrant green. I did not use cold grays, and I used AK and drop paint from scale 75. It's quite a new paint I have kickstarted, and this is working. These colors are working very well for me. So like gray green, warm gray, grimy gray, and going even for a lighter version of gray from the drop paint. This is just a recommendation, but I just try to write down which type of gray I have used, especially if what I did here, build multiple terrain pieces in a certain style. For the Nurgle tank, I've chosen 2 drop paint colors and also an AK color. The frog green as the latest highlight, with the exception of pistachio green as the edge highlight. And this is my way to go for Nurgle, because I want to have a more bluish dark green tone, and following up and not going too comic-y, but still have a vibrant color at the very end. I also use a variation of brown colors from AK and from Vallejo and drop paint, earthy tones for the earth ground itself, and also with some dark chocolate brown, dark brown, and some yellow parts for the sandbags. But all these colors are pretty much exchangeable, and I think it's only really important that you find a style and a warmth or coldness in whatever you want to paint. So here it's a little bit warmer, so warmer colors, warmer grays. Streaking grime, dark streaking grime, and if you have access to it, something I can just recommend are the dystopian brown colors from Villainy Ink. This guy's from the Grimdark Compendium. He also, I think they are now available to buy them directly. Was a Kickstarter. He was unhappy about the change of the recipe of the AK streaking grime, and he did, I think I have 3 or 4 in total available. Great stuff, terrible dropper pipettes in there, everything is clogging, but the product itself is wonderful. I will also use some greenish colors for the toxic lake itself. So let's get started. First of all, I start of course with the basic green for the tank. And again, I think it's a 3rd or 4th reminder, I have not glued the ruin pieces, which I will later glue on top of the tank itself. I will paint them separately and glue them at the very end on top of the tank. So this color is a very how to say that, it's a very quite bright green already from my perspective. but I will dull everything down with enamel colors later. I am not too careful, but of course I will try not to overspray too much on the base itself, but I can easily make up for mistakes later with gray colors. So following up with some gray color and some following up with some brown color, I will more or less randomly, especially on the very edges of the base plate and close to the ruins, add some darker brown color. Looks a little bit reddish here on the video, but it's more of a dark brown. And again later with after dry brushing and adding enamels color like the grime, the streaking grime and everything, it will dull down and look very good. So had not used this bottle before, so used the airbrush cleaning tool to poke a hole in the bottle, working quite well. And again, applying some brighter earthy color especially at the edges and randomly at certain parts. Again, it's all about color variation. You can all go all gray, but then you have no contrast. You have no, you cannot distinct certain areas here. So I go quite heavy with the brown, because I will also go quite heavy with the gray later. And all these colors will surprisingly create an interesting effect. You will see this here, especially with this kind of yellowish color, which is not looking good at the very beginning here for the sandbags. But trust me, this is only to create some hue and some base tone for the sandbags. Now they're extremely yellow here. I just go for I call it like a strong zenithal, or maybe even a light zenithal if you, because I also spray a little bit in the shadows, but I will still keep an angle. So I use a little bit of black as a natural shadow, but I will later overspray them with a brighter ivory tone. So for now, this is just really base level coloring. So I always jump back and forth between these individual sections. So one layer of paint can fully dry, and then I go for the next level, and these are already the highlights, so the first layer of highlights for the Nurgle tank. And of course, as usual, you focus on the higher parts of of the tank. I'm now starting to be a little bit more careful not to spray over the earthy parts too much. When it comes to shading and highlighting tanks or flat surfaces, you can go for a more realistic approach, which would always be the highest part, or you can go more for a visual appealing part or style, which is of course highlights, but also going on curves. So for example, with this bulldozer blade at the front, I highlight not the front part too much, but I do the contrary. I highlight the lower part of the tank. So with the light coming from certain directions, that is not optically correct, but it's looking good on a display piece, like a terrain piece. So I let this dry, and with some scale 75 thinner, this is my airbrush thinner to go, the one I always use, I dilute the AK third generation colors Yeah, I cannot tell you the exact mixing amount. Depends also a little bit on the color, but it's usually I think around 50-50 with a little bit less thinner, so like 60-40 or something. You always can test this on different pieces, but I have to say these AK third generation colors can be easily shot through the airbrush, and it's working quite well. So these are the pieces I will later glue on top of the tank, and I give them a rough layer of the base color gray. I've used this greenish gray, and and again, not the most detailed work. I want to spend enough time that the display, that the terrain piece is looking good actually, from my perspective. But I don't want to overdo it, as I have so many models and everything which needs to be painted, and I do not have much time to do so. So again, here I do also a strong highlight on all these little pieces here lying on the floor, and do a zenithal one, and you see I'm a little bit overshooting to the earth, which gives some kind of dusty look on the earthy parts, but I will not actively do that. So a little bit of overspray is great, but I will not overdo it. And again, here I keep also a certain angle to use the black as a natural shadow, and as this is a ruin, for me that's fine. It gives this some kind of dark, grimdark atmosphere. If there's a more vibrant thing like an Dari building or whatsoever, what I plan to paint in the future, I will do the total contrary and be much more vigilant and much more careful while doing this. But for like a ruin base, this is, yeah, a very thankful way of building terrain, because you do not have to be so overly careful. Side note, of course, you can do everything with a paintbrush as well. It will just need much more time, but of course it's possible. Airbrush is a tool and not a necessity. I leave the metal parts more or less out as far as I can. Apply a little bit of gray as well on top of the tank ruins. But especially I will focus now and build up a little gradient. You will see this with the following gray colors, that I will again use the lower parts as the highlighted areas and not the higher parts. This sounds absolutely contrary to any kind of logical understanding of how to paint, but personally it makes the model very interesting and looks like that the sun is coming from a very steep angle, or not a steep angle, but directly from above. So you can use, so it's creating more of a light source on top of the edges. You will see what I mean when this model is done. But for now, I've just spent a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, to reach that point. So it's usually quite fast. A fast process when you have access to an airbrush. So, and then I will continue to build up the gray, and I'm mixing this again with my scale 75 thinner, airbrush thinner. Always do some test spray at the end, at the side I mean, because I do not want to have splatters or whatever on the model. And you see I'm starting to focus on the higher areas. So I'm not really covering every gray part. I will now really just apply it to raised areas and already leave a lot of darker gray or black parts alone. And here you see what I meant before. I'm focusing more on the lower parts of each individual section. So going from dark to bright per section. Again, not a realistic way of painting, but it makes a model quite interesting from my perspective. If you sometimes, as an airbrush user, encounter pressure, or you have a little bit too relaxed with your finger and you have a little bit too much pressure and you have like a more splattery spray picture for ruins, that's not usually a big issue, because it even creates like a little textured, as you can see, a little texture on the wall. And especially when you use heavy weathering later, then yes. Here I position the piece on the side and see also and check also the angle, and focused on the certain angles I will positioning the pieces later. This is really important, otherwise you will create a weird effect when the highlighting is not in line with the rest of the model. So all of this is coming together quite well. At the moment it still looks very, how to say that, uncoherent. Like you have a lot of speckles and bright colors and whatsoever. So because I want this to dry, I will use now dropper paint and start to tone down the yellowish sandbags. But I still go with the yellowish color. It's a very pale yellow. So you see it already fits much better into the overall color scheme of the ruin base. Yeah, so don't be afraid to use strong base colors, because this gives you a nice shadow as your darker tone. So really last highlight for me, I really focus now on some of lower parts, or go for like light speckles and rays of light, and we'll do some final highlights on the top parts and on really on the highest more brightest parts of the ruins. And you see how rough I'm really dealing with that, because in the very end, after all the weathering, it will be drawn together. So using some more brighter brown color, I will now start to redo a little bit the areas where I think it's too much gray, where I still want to have more like a highlight brown in terms of the standard soil and the ground. Otherwise, I found this too grayish, like I mentioned at the beginning. I want still to have some contrast between the gray dust, the gray ruins, to the earth itself. And still later with the weathering, especially rust effects, will make use of the brighter brown itself if you spray this or color accidentally certain areas. I also use that tone on the lower parts of the ruins to simulate earthy dust and coloring, and also create a little bit of a shade for the ruin parts itself. Again, it's all about making your pieces interesting. So getting for a good highlight, this is the strongest highlight for the Nurgle tank. It's the frog green from AK, and I will focus now really on the highest parts, but still do some strong coloring here, especially in the middle area where the light hits the surface. And this gives now the really vibrant green I was aiming for. I focus on the higher parts on this. It's not the chain, but it's the cover of the chain itself. And I will focus here really on the lower parts, to create, to enhance the curvature of the bulldozer blade. And highlight the 1, 2, 3, I think, little pieces I had available in this sprue, I think from the sides, from the sponson guns. So, and that's already all. It's just like 3 layers of airbrush, and I think it is a nice contrast to the, not really necessarily nice contrast, but it's coming together very well with the warmth of the color, if we can speak about warmth in this green and gray. So I have to apologize, guys, the first section have been quite low from the resolution. I have no idea what had happened. I assume my camera switched to a lower resolution, so this is a better quality. So as far as I can, I spray all the metal parts with Vallejo Magnesia, not with steel, which is usually my preferred metal color, but it's magnesia here. And I spray all the pieces I can spray, just to save some time. But you have to be quite familiar with your airbrush not to overspray now on the gray parts. But I think this is a training, just an exercise. And whatever I can spray, I spray, and the rest I afterwards repaint or complete with a brush. So I will now spray all the individual metal parts and take my time to do so. I spray these little fins and of course mainly the parts with the broken windows, the pipes, the ground floor elements, and the majority of metal parts in the for the tank itself. And also, if I want to go for corroded metal, I usually just spray them. I mean, for terrain pieces, I usually spray them with a metal and do some heavy corroding afterwards, like with what you will see later with the dirty down rust effects, or AK streaks, or oil paints, or a combination of everything. Here I spray these little I call it rebar parts. And the individual connectors here between the sections. Again, I have to say this was an eBay. I would not really call it scam. I just didn't pay too much attention to it. So it's a 3D printed file. But still, I think it's perfectly fitting into the scheme of the non-accessible Sector Imperialis or Sector Mechanicus stuff, which have been very, very great, like the administrative building or the famous Basilica Imperialis. And there are a lot of very talented people out there who offer their STL files for free or even for very few euro. And I can just recommend supporting these artists by, if you want this, by buying this stuff. I bought a lot of stuff myself. It's just amazing what these people can do. So I have not fast forwarded this specific part of the video, because I just wanted to give you also the the real-time speed you can do this stuff. So it really is not taking very long if you do this carefully. And I will just really spray the areas where I don't risk any overspray. If you are like me, you are always hesitant to push that limit to save time, but yeah, painting over especially highlighted areas can be quite annoying. So yeah, use your brush later. I hope you can see this here. On top of the tank is still some texture from the sculptor mold, and this later gives me a great basis for rust effects. And that's what I have mentioned before in the building of that terrain piece. that especially for corroded stuff, it's not really important that you take so much care here. Yeah, as you can see, quite careful spraying, low pressure. Still a 4mm nozzle, by the way, so but you can achieve great results. And honestly, if you overspray at this point, I don't give a flying fuck. It's just like, okay, then I do more heavy corroding effects there on this side. Some people have been asking me privately why I'm using gloves all the time. It's just a simple reason. I don't use gloves all the time, but especially with some of the colors and bigger pieces where you have to touch them, your skin and your sweat is removing paint much faster than a glove. So it's just like to protect your models and also your hands. You don't, if you have a long painting session with enamels and all these substances, yeah, your hands are clean and you're not damaging the model. So for the rest of the metal parts, I use now the brush, of course, to do that. And this is a side note, don't use, I mean you can, but I would not recommend using metal colors on a wet palette. Some will work, yes, but especially these Vallejo colors, they will separate very easily on the membrane of the wet palette. And for me that's not working very well, so I just got used to just simply pour them in these metal trays when I use metal colors. And yeah, so here, this is of course something I cannot really do. I mean, I can with masking tape, but it's too much effort. I will carefully paint all the rest of the metal parts in silver. Okay, in same color I used for the airbrush. And it's working very well with the brush, by the way. All the Vallejo colors, even when it's this airbrush color, metal colors are working like a charm. I use them all the time. Yeah, and I will of course finish now everything here, all the metal parts. So that's now done. Now I will do some heavy dry brushing with different beige colors. This is birch from scale 75, and we'll do some heavy dry brushing on top of the sandbags and also ruins with ivory. The dry brushing on the sandbags gives also some interesting texture, a little bit of texture, not too much, but a little bit of texture. And you see, it's still, you can already distinguish the sandbags definitely from the rest of the ruins, but they are not so popping up. And that's what I mean. I don't want to put the focus on the sandbags. I want to have them in a different color. And you should recognize them quite soon, but of course the focus is on the crawler itself, and also later on the resin toxic pool. So you can use pretty much the same color, grayish ivory color. Ivory in general is a very, very good color to even highlight gray and brown colors as a prime highlight. And so I'm not really do a lot of variation here. So this is the next step. You see I have painted with copper. I have painted a few of the pipes. Here and here I have also added, because I think it's good to have some details here, I have painted the skulls in a more brighter ivory tone. And I have added some yellowish cables here, because yellow-green is fitting quite well together. And again here on the outside. Honestly, I later realized that I have missed to paint the lamp, so I will do this in a later time. I have painted the valves in red. A few of the displays there, the coat pads also in red, but these are only really the highlights. So at this point I will not dry brush the tank. I will use some yellowish green here from AK again to really do some edge highlights, and honestly extremely limited edge highlights to the tank itself, just to make it pop a little bit. I'm not the yes, you need edge highlights on every edge type of guy, of painter. So really just on the curvature on top, a little bit on the barrel itself from the mortar, and these little raised areas on the side track covers. And that's all, and a little bit on the scratches and recesses on the tank itself. Of course, again, you can put as much as effort in as you want. For me, it is still a terrain piece. I was saying this and repeating myself, and I want to use it as fast as I can on my table. So this is my standard where I think it's looking very well for me, and I'm satisfied to look at it, but I'm not putting in the same effort as for a miniature. But for a centerpiece, you might, whatever you want. That's the great thing about our hobby. A little bit on the scratches and everything. Here, these areas, you have these areas where it's not really a scratch, but these kind of flashy mutations with Nurgle. You can leave it like that, but you will see in a minute that I made the decision to add some skinny, not some skinny, but some skin tone to it, just to create a little bit of variety and get it add a little layer of this demon machine, demon-like Nurgle atmosphere. Yeah, these areas here, especially close to the top. So now we will add some flesh color to it. So I made the decision to use dwarf skin for the base tone, and I will just shade it with some violet and some contrast colors, some magenta contrast colors from Games Workshop. And I will use the finer needle now, a 2mm needle, to really focus on the small areas. Of course, you can do it with a 4mm airbrush, or you can just stipple it or glaze it with the brush. So I'm getting some semi-transparent look, fading it out around these little recesses here, scars. Had some little clogged up airbrush here. Yeah, this happens from time to time. I have the feeling that brighter colors, especially white and skin colors, are usually more prone to getting my airbrush clogged. I don't know if you share the same experience, so if you do, write this in the comments. But ivory, white, skin colors, they tend to clog my airbrush more frequently than, yeah, darker colors. I don't know if this is just a interesting circumstance or maybe the reality for the paints itself. I think it's something to do with the binding of the pigments. But I think I don't want to cut it out of the video, just to, yeah, show you the little struggle, but also how easily it can be fixed. So here we are back again, adding some skin color to the dozer blade and on top of the tank. So for the fleshy parts I use a pink tone from the contrast color range. You can use any kind of pinkish, more pinkish red, pinkish color. So like magenta pink or something like that. And I will just like use very tiny bit inside the fleshy part to get this kind of strong, more infected look on the inside of the fleshy parts, and it just makes this more vibrant and more realistic. And again, I will tone it down later with oil paints, enamels and everything, so even if it's a little bit too bright, we will bring it down later. So, and that's all what I will do. I will not further touch it. I will not really add more highlights now to these pock marks or something, because I will cover it nonetheless with the other debris parts. So that's all for me at this, for this part, for this terrain piece. So we are reaching now the end of the main painting part. What I'm doing right now is do some heavy dry brushing with some ivory color over all the little debris parts, the little ruins parts, all these called sandy areas. Ivory is a very thankful color. You can use it even here for the yellowish sandbags, and you see I'm going quite rough over it. This is also a good example to show you how resistant the material is, even the scattered terrain, the little stones and everything. It's really glued together, very stable. Of course you will have some loose parts from time to time, but either you can glue them back on, like here in between the tracks, or the area of the mortar itself, but in general it is very stable. So I also use on the pillars again in ivory and all the concrete, plasteel, however it's called, parts. Let's do some edge highlights here. Spare of course the metal parts, which I will define later with Vallejo chrome color. I mean, dry brushing is something I rarely use nowadays for models, but it's a wonderful technique for terrain pieces, larger pieces with a rough structure. It saves you so much time. So you could go even with a higher color. I'm gluing a few pieces back on which have been coming loose with super glue, and I will not individually do weathering. So here I will now glue the ruined parts on top of the tank. This is what I told now numerous times within this tutorial. And I will also add, just for this part, a little decal here, one of the numbers, or from the Adeptus Mechanicus symbols, even a number. You might have this from your army nonetheless. It just gives a nice little detail, as the view of the observer is also already drawn to the greenish tank itself. So I'm cutting out the decals, soaking it in water. I'm not even use for this specific part like decal fix or something. I will just soak it in a bit of water, attach it, and later use micro sol, like a decal softener. You can get these now from numerous brands. I think AK Interactive has its own decal solvent. Vallejo has one, and Microsol and Microset are based on recommendations, my way to go. So soak this in water, and after a while I will just attach it to this panel on the lower part of the ruin. With a brush I usually carefully check if it's already coming off the carrier film, attach it, and that's it. It's just a little detail which pops up and later gets bound together, drawn together with all the weathering we will do in a minute. So in the meantime, until the decal is dry, I will now rethink the positioning and then glue with some super glue, glue this directly to the tank. Theoretically, you can weather the tank before you do that, but again, it's a terrain piece, not and just for play, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I will nonetheless carefully position this broken window part so it's looking realistic. So I envision that the tank somehow drove into it, broke it, and then it collapsed on top of the tank. So I will carefully put the broken pieces still in the same orientation, so it looks quite pleasing to the eye, but I mean just should make sense. So the next step, and usually the last step, is using AK Interactive Streaking Grime, or here Winter Streaking Grime, or similar products. These are the enamel colors I have spoken about. So you can dilute them with oil thinner, not with water. And here comes, I will just give you a few very important information here. You can also use the Villainy ink ones. I've spoken about these in the beginning of this video. I really enjoy them. I think they are great. I hate their pipettes, because everything is clogging in there, and you cannot really use it, but if you just pour it into an airbrush, it will work. So I will do a heavy weathering with these over the whole base itself, over the whole thing, the whole terrain piece. I will not distinguish. With the rust streaks, I will be a little bit more conservative and focus on the metal parts for sure. For the colors you use, it's very important that you varnish your model before you do. Especially here, the drop paint colors are very, very sensitive to oil thinners. I have realized the hard way. If you don't varnish, it won't work. The Model Air is more resistant. I usually don't have to varnish it, but here the drop in paint, you really do. Otherwise, the paint is coming off. So I will use a gloss varnish here first. to increase to reduce the surface tension and just allow everything oil-based to really move into all the surfaces. But this is mainly a protection step. Be careful with the varnish you use. I haven't really realized the big difference between satin varnish, glossy varnish whatsoever. Glossy varnish simply has the advantage you see where you have done that. So with the gloss varnish you can really go pretty much everywhere. If you would, for example, have the resin first, the cast resin, what we will later do in this tutorial, you have to be careful, of course. I wouldn't recommend it. So I will really spray this over the whole terrain piece, and as you can see, it gives this nice bluish hue at the beginning. No worries. This is when it's dry you won't see that hue, of course, but it's very easy that you can really see, okay, I have varnished everything, especially the tank itself. I have to be careful here that everything is covered, otherwise your paint below might get damaged, and that would destroy the work you have put in the model so far. So take your time, let it dry properly. You can use a heat gun or a dryer to do that, but usually airbrushing varnish, that stuff dries very fast. So I just left it for, I don't know, like 1 hour on a heater, and I could continue with the enamel oil paints. And you see I go really heavy with the varnish, and I can just recommend it. It's important. Here again, I missed that part, I have to say. I was a bit lazy, I haven't painted it. Maybe I will do in the future, but I have now skipped the part of the lamp. So coming back, this has now fully dried, and you can see the glossy shine, especially on the tank. Here, this area, we will later do the resin part 2 on that part, but for now I will focus on the weathering and the pool then later. So with a black green, I will just pour some drops of black green into the recess there and try to cover the ground a little bit. I'm just doing this to create a little bit of an illusion of depth, like you do with blue and lakes, that you go from a darker blue to a lighter blue to the outside. And I will also already use some fluor colors, inks and the FX ones from scale 75, just to add some color variation and blend that in the still, do some wet blending into the wet darker green color. Also going a little bit more heavy on the inside because I wanted it to flow below this plate. And I let this dry, add a few drops of Liquitex fluor ink, to just make it pop and make it interesting. So this has to dry as well before you start spraying oil-based color on it, and I will simply leave that area free. I will not do some weathering there, so it won't affect the colors. So if you keep that, it can still dry, and you can, of course, like I do, spray around that area. That's not really an issue. So I will simply pour a little bit of the villainy ink into my airbrush, and I go really massive with that. Now you see I'm really spraying this really pretty much all over the model. The trick with enamels is that you can just then afterwards use a cotton swab or a brush with clean oil thinner to remove the excess and to create some streaks. This is what I will show you in a second. You can use different colors already. You don't have to do it step by step, but if you want a specific effect and then add another specific effect, you would have to add a second layer of varnish to conserve the first effect. That is important to know because of course when you go with the thinner, it will definitely affect your first layer of oil-based paints. So it does not have to dry, and be careful, do not let it dry overnight. It will then later fix and then be fixed, and then you won't be able to really have the effect. So always when you do this, plan to do the cleanup part afterwards. I go now more for a greenish color and spray this, and you see it creates a lot of fume, much more than acrylic paint. So always wear a mask or use a suction station, an airbrush station, or a well ventilated room. So I'm wearing a mask here, you're not seeing this, just that's important. So with some clear thinner, I can just recommend odorless thinners. I will now try to let it flow to the lower part of all the recesses. So for this terrain piece, I do not do an acrylic wash. I do nothing like this at all. I will just pull down, and you see it creates these lovely streaks, which makes it old and weathered, and when it dries, it dulls down everything. So the brightness of the tank will also be reduced a little bit. You won't see this right now, only when it has dried. So I can of course recommend, if you have never used it, make some tests on models you're not really painting or not using, to avoid any bad surprises. You see, this is creating these streaks. For me, this is like the rain, which creates streaks with dirt and crusted effects. If I went a little bit too heavy, I will do this with a cotton swab to really remove the grime. But for terrain pieces, I mainly just simply stroke down with the brush loaded with thinner. The rust effects also available from AK, and honestly my way to go. You have crusted rust effects, bright rust, medium rust, heavy rust. I will go quite heavy here because I wanted to have more corrosion on all the metal parts. But it's not exclusively important that you have this on the metal parts. It can also be on the other parts of that model, as long as you use the same method of streaking it down later. Even of course for the Nurgle tank, for the black crawler here itself, I go very heavy, but I will remove a lot of it in a second. A little bit on the floor tiles, and of course on both sides. This stuff will dry, but as long as you don't let it dry for hours, you can still work with that. But again, don't make the mistake, let it cure overnight. So, and same process, I will really pull this down, and as you can see, it, from my perspective, looks lovely. It looks so heavy, worn in use, but realistic, as rain and everything washes down the rust over time and then accumulates it on the lower part, creating a natural shadow effect and a very realistic one. If you go too heavy, which I did here in certain parts, I just remove it with a cotton swab or a fine towel. But honestly, it's like everything else, your personal preference. And it's nothing new. It's just the way many painters work, but it's such an easy technique, and I know that people have some hesitation sometimes if they are new to the hobby, or oils and everything, but it's so easy, guys. I can just recommend it if you have never used it. Buy at least a streaking grime, which is totally sufficient to create some nice effects. So here again, I'm more stippling a lot of thinner on top, and I will simply use the rest on the brush and immediately pull it down a little bit and remove the excess with the cotton swab if necessary. I will spare, of course, the mainly stone parts of this terrain piece, but still it would look even good here with this reddish color, as we have used a lot of warm gray color, so that makes it usually very pleasing to look at. Of course, if I would have a centerpiece and need or would love to have more details, I would use different color variations. I will do more of a deep shadowing in the cavities of the pillars itself. I even might use other oil colors and do some dotting technique. You can Google for oil color dotting technique. This is usually coming from these guys who mainly build tanks and military style models, but you can learn a lot from these guys. So just recommend checking out videos from military painters. They have some great ideas and some nice tricks how to build terrain and how to paint and work with oils. So again here, heavy weathering and a little bit removal with the cotton swab if I went too heavy. And again, you won't see the effect to 100% right now. It's already looking great. It won't change too much, but it will dull down your overall model. So in general, for creating the toxic effect, which is from my perspective the fun part, I will be mixing a 2-component resin, which gives us that gooey, slimy look. Here in this area, I want to have this toxic pool coming out of the Nurgle tank. And there are many products out like Stillwater or Diorama FX for smaller parts, for smaller areas where you want to create a water effect. These products are great, but for everything where you want to have a little bit more depth and the layer is higher, like 1 centimeter or even 5 millimeters, I prefer 2K resin. This is a diamond clear resin. You can pay around like 30 euro for 3 kilograms. It's usually a clear casting epoxy resin. Really, please read the manual about how big the layer is allowed to be before creating too much heat and adhere to the mixing instructions. That's really important. Also humidity and everything. So what I will do is I will use, because it's weight and not volume, this is a common mistake people do, so it's not like 2:1 in milliliters, it's in gram, so the mass is relevant. So I use a kitchen scale to measure the weight, and I have just made a rough estimation how much I need. Theoretically, you can really measure this by putting water or whatever in that pool, but for our purpose and with these small amounts, it's usually fine to make a rough estimation. So I use simply these to-go coffee cups and measure with the scale. Yeah, be careful, wear gloves. All these epoxy resins or general resin is not so good for your skin and body, so wear gloves, clean up, and don't let kids, animals or whatever close to it. Here I have poured in a little bit too much, so I will use this pipette here, plastic pipette I use for airbrush colors, to remove a little bit of the excess material and pour this back into the container. In the meantime, allow me to explain to you what we'll use in colors. I use Liquitex inks. The reason why I'm using this is because instead of using acrylic paint, which will work well as well, is that I want to see the ground. I want to see the structure of the ground of the pool. And with these transparent inks, you will have just a coloring transparent effect in the resin. This is important. If you use acrylic color, it will be very dense and you won't see it. Every style has its own application purpose, which is fine. But for me, in this particular example, I will use inks just to color the resin without creating a solid color. So I just simply pour these two components together. Again, ensure that you really take care of the mixing requirements. Yeah, take your time here and mix thoroughly with whatever you can spare. I honestly had nothing at this moment, so I used an AK. No, I think it's a Green Stuff World. Green Stuff World weathering stick. And really stir, 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 stir. And if you think you're ready, stir a little bit more. Then I add just like 1 or 2 drops for that amount of the Liquitex ink, and you can just see, okay, is this enough? Is this fine for me? I think it's a little bit too, fades a little bit too much. So I added a few more drops of the ink. This dissolves very easily, and with that color I'm very happy. Looks very toxic from my perspective, but not too comic-y, if that's a word. So afterwards I pour this into my recess. I'm careful regarding the bubbles. I will come back to this in a minute. And a little bit over the plate on the side, so to give some splattery look. But I take my time, you should do as well, because then you can really observe where the resin is flowing without destroying your desk or the surrounding parts of that area. For removing the bubbles, I got into my kitchen supply and I got a little burner. This is some piezo burner, because bubbles are pretty much unavoidable. Only if you would work in a vacuum chamber. So I just briefly go over this 1 second, and as you can see, all the bubbles are disappearing instantly, especially for such small amounts. That's where it's working perfectly. Just be careful that you do not burn if you have high and flammable material on your base. So in theory and also in practically, this should just sit. But for me, I wanted to add some highlights, so I have used fluorescent yellow from Liquitex and added a few drops. This is something was new to me as well. So I experienced that at the very beginning it looked very well when you just like drew this into the little pool with a cotton swab. I was very happy with the effect, but the ink really dissolved very fast, and so later I had to add a few more drops, but I will cover this in this video as well. You can just like draw irregular shapes and lines through your lake, as there are fresh and different colored parts dissolving into that pool, and you can repeat that process as long as the resin is still liquid, as often as you want. It's just like your preference. So following up here, I will add a few tufts, like black tufts. I just bought from Green Stuff World, from their outlet. Random colors, just damaged tufts. It's their label. I keep these close to the pool. Later I will different tufts to the overall model. I press one a little bit inside the pool, just to get add some more realism to it. And yeah, and then I realized that I still have a lot of resin left over, which was a little bit unexpected, and I don't want to get it to waste. So I applied a little bit more inside the little cavity at the base of the tank itself. And then I realized sorry, excuse me. Then I realized still, well, there's a lot of resin left over, and what can I do with that? So continuing in the process of adding a little bit more color as mentioned before. So again, few drops of Liquitex yellow, which will finally give me the effect I wanted to create. And you will see later that's still dissolving very well, but I have some fine yellow area in that part. So this makes makes it overall, I think, to a successful process. So in general, this should just sit and dry. So with the leftover resin I was not really happy, so I quickly grabbed some blue stuff from Green Stuff World. This is their heat moldable mold. You can just use boiling water or very hot water and form it to quite a gooey material. And this comes in like packs of 4, I think 4 of these blue blocks. And I squeezed them together. And what I wanted to do is, because I have other winter themed bases, I grabbed already a piece of casted resin, which is a little bit translucent with a little shade of green. And I wanted to create some eyes. So I have added a dark turquoise, bluish color from Liquitex again, to change the color from green to some kind of turquoise tinted bluish ice-like, deep ice-like color. And I will show you two ways where you can use leftover resin. So first of all I will pour the blue resin into the blue tag mold. I think it's a blue tag, sorry, it's just like, I don't know how they call it, you just go on the website. It's a form you can really wrap around your object, and it really keeps a high detail. So I pressed my acrylic resin into the form, and I wrapped it around the stone-like cast as much as I could, and create like a little boat shape form so the resin will stay inside when I pour it in. This was a very hectical approach, I have to say, so maybe in the future I will do another video with a little bit more preparation. But as I said, I don't want it to go my resin, that I had to dispose the resin here. So, and this is why it looks so unprepared. I'm sorry for this, guys. It just came up through this video, but I thought it would be a nice addition to show you some real-time decisions I had to make as I wanted to save the resin. Maybe that was not really important, but at this point for me it was. And yeah, so it's also good that you can see that usually you have a little bit of time to work with the resin. It's not getting hard in a few minutes. On the contrary, I think after one day it gets very flexible, and it's still very, you should never touch it, because your fingerprint will be clearly visible on the resin. I think it takes 5 to 7 days to really cure to a hard material. So yeah, I'm trying to find a position where I can leave it, as I wanted to leave the overall resin now here on my desk and just cure it for a few days. But the second option you can do, is because I still had resin left over, is to use the tufts packages I just used, and which you saw that I used them for the casting in the former video of creating these ruins. I just pour the resin inside a very, very small layer, so heat is not an issue at all. And this is a little trick which you can use to create ice on lakes. So this is a very thin layer I will later break into small pieces. And then you have this nice bluish color, and that gives a very, very nice structure and effect you can use for ice bases, lakes, and other diorama parts or wargaming terrain projects you might do. So this has cured for a few days, and I just want to show you briefly what I meant with cracking it open, so you can easily remove it. Very shiny, translucent, and also quite stable, I have to say, so don't expect that you can easily break thicker parts. You won't be able to. You really have to saw and to polish it again. This is now really very hard, but in that layer you still have a little bit of flexibility, but again, very stable material. So I prefer cutting it and then just breaking it you see it creates some kind of sharp edges. And with the hobby knife, you can do some scratches on top of the surface, and that will look later when you add some artificial snow and dry brush it carefully with white. I will do another video about this. Create some nice ice effect. So, little trick for leftover resin, and simply cut parts you want to cut. And as you can see, breaking is easy, cutting through is not. So you just have to cut it, and then you can easily break it in irregular shapes. No. So, just as a little side note for using the resin. Also, the thicker form is coming out well, and as you can see, it really has a nice detail. Looks like a solid ice block. Sprinkle some snow on it, and depending on what color you use below, you can create nice color variations when you have a blue background, for example, to create some ice blocks. So, coming back to our base project, I have bought a few different tufts from Gamer's Grass. Not that I'm particularly keen or promoting that company, but for my purpose they have some nice colors and have a quite okay pricing. Here in Germany you usually pay like 5 to 6 euro per set. I don't know if you guys have other experience or can recommend other brands as well, maybe cheaper. Please drop these in the comments. So I used these finally 3 of these tufts, and that can come whatever you want. Tufts are my way to go, just to add a little bit of variety to a base, especially to a ruins base, because it gives the impression of time. So that this is a ruin for a long time, and these tufts are trying to grow through the to the ruins on the soil, or they have been there before and they're just burnt and damaged. And I think if you use brown and yellowish or beige tufts, that really serves the purpose. So as you can see here, this resin has cured as well. It's very glossy, but you have to be careful when dust and everything is settling down. Then for that, if that happens, I usually use my airbrush or just blow over it to remove any kind of dust. This is pretty much unavoidable. With colored resin, you usually don't have an issue with yellowing, which happens sometimes with clear resin, especially if you are not careful with humidity. But with colored resin, you won't see that. So although tufts have gluey side, I always glue them with super glue to give them a stable foundation. And I randomly put all these tufts on, not all these, but a few of these tufts all over the base in different colors. You can also use tufts to cover areas where you made a mistake or which are not so looking well, to really remove a few mistakes you made. Although this is a ruin and everything should be dark and grimdark and blah blah blah, I prefer to add some greenish and very bright colors as well, just to give the impression of, well, yeah, there is some life. Could be there are some healthy plants in there, and all of these different tufts add to the realism of the base in my perspective. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I will give the overall model, with the exception of the resin, a little cover with an ultramatte varnish. And be really careful not to spray on top of your shiny resin. This will of course destroy the effect, and ultramatte also dulls the metallic colors if you use true metallic metal. If you paint such a model in non-metallic metal, you have my deepest respect, but that's too much work for me. So what I do is, to counter that effect after the varnish has dried, I will use some Vallejo chrome color and carefully dry brush the metallic parts, also on the Nurgle tank as well, just to make the few edges pop. And I will go over all the metallic parts of the Nurgle tank, all the metallic windows and metallic parts where I did this corrosion effect with the enamels as described before, and will carefully stipple from time to time or simply dry brush the metallic areas to bring a little bit of the shine back, but don't overdo it because it should still keep the damaged corroded effect. But this is something where you find your own, you have to find your own balance, your own style. My style is, how I define it, a little bit more realistic damage, whereas other Nurgle themed armies are quite comic-y. No? They have these kind of vibrant green and vibrant pink colors, which I personally don't like, but I also don't like if battle damage is totally overdone, when you just have, okay, there is a little speckle of green, the rest is already only rust. But this is absolutely your personal preference. For me and my style, I like this more, and I wanted to still look at the model and see, hey, yeah, there are some colors, there is some variation, there are some details, like the cables, like little dots, like the vents, with the sandbags a little bit in a warmer color. We have the huge contrast from Toxic Pool, this shiny Toxic Pool, and towards the overall very matte scenery. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now. And when you put a test model on top of it, okay, luckily here it was not, of course, fitting with the Bialtan Aldari. You see there is enough space around, and this model is staying quite stable. You can really use this piece. You can even position it on the tank on certain areas. And I have chosen most of the angles not too steep that the model is falling down or is wobbly, which I, again, think is very important, that you should be able to easily access terrain, but still have, good looking terrain if you want to go the extra mile and take more time to prepare that. Even a bigger base fits perfectly here, and that was my intention from the very start. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I know it's quite a long video, and I'm very grateful for all of you who have watched this till the end, and I hope I give you more inspiration and not only like guiding. And yeah, if you liked that video, will help me if you subscribe, as this is still a small channel. Thank you very much.